Yeah, my name is Rainer Nerge, and I'm here with my colleague Jakob Steckel. We are from a consultancy company called Sustainable AG from Germany, and we are very happy to be here and to present you the findings of our carbon removal feasibility study for Kyrgyzstan. And yeah, we welcome you to hear about the results and also to give input and ask questions. And yeah, we will. There will also be, if there are questions after the presentation, we can also answer them and give you feedback. Our background is, yeah, we are agricultural experts. Working in the consultancy Sustainable AG, and we started this project I think one year ago together within the SUFACHAIN project together with Hochschule Rhein-Waal, KAFLU and other stakeholders. Yeah, we also visited uh, the fields and the farmers on site in last July. That's the title, Carbon Removal Feasibility Study. It's for evaluating the potential of a tree biomass carbon removal project in smallholder agroforestry systems in Kyrgyzstan. And below you see the main stakeholders. This is us. This is what I just said. These are this is me and my colleagues, Jakob Steckel and Isidora Bosic. And there's also a bit of information about our company. As said, we are a climate and sustainability consultancy. And one of our focus topics is agriculture and agroforestry. We exist since 2008, are over 120 employees, and said we are based in Germany and worked on a lots of projects. Next slide, please. We will present you about the purpose of the project, of the feasibility study, and a bit of the carbon market development in Kyrgyzstan. This carbon feasibility assessment we did, which is now at its final stage, it's the evaluation of the suitability of agroforestry measures piloted in a SUFACHAIN project for long-term CO2 sequestration within the scope of a carbon project. The project background, as you know, is a SUFACHAIN project which seeks to analyze and integrate agroforestry systems into local land use while promoting sustainable resource management and enhancing local value chains. And the specific aim of our project is to increase local value creation through the monetization of ecological and social ecosystem services. And for that, we conducted a carbon feasibility study in Kyrgyzstan to assess if it is feasible to sequester carbon via agroforestry measures using a carbon credit standard. Okay, and in our feasibility study led by Sustainable AG, our main questions were, so how can, in general, how can carbon sequestration be achieved in smallholder farming in Kyrgyzstan? Yeah, and what options for carbon projects do we have there? And another main question is, what is the potential of carbon sequestration or CO2 sequestration, which can be achieved within piloted agroforestry systems? So the level in tons per hectare. But not just only that, but also whether it is possible to reach a positive cost-benefit ratio in such a project. Yeah, income from carbon credits versus costs for such a project, including planting cost, establishment cost, etc. Another question was what risks are associated to would be associated to such a carbon project, and what are the technical requirements for implementing a project on site. And finally, also the last main questions was which requirements need to be achieved to register a carbon project and to monitor the carbon sequestration. First of all, a small overview of the carbon market in Kyrgyzstan and also about the existing Acorn carbon project in Kyrgyzstan. So the current situation of the carbon market in Central Asia, specifically in Kyrgyzstan, is that the voluntary carbon market there is poorly developed. So at the moment, we have among the larger carbon standards as gold standard or Plan Vivo or Vera, there's no registered afforestation project in Kyrgyzstan which can be found. However, as said, there's a new Acorn Rabobank carbon project in Kyrgyzstan, which is operated by AFOCO, the Asian Forest Corporation Organization. It's quite a new project, I believe. And there in this project, there are 11,000 smallholder farmers participating at the moment, and it covers the regions Jalalabad, Osh, Batken, Isikul, Chui, Talas, and it's about almost 10,000 hectares. And they do agroforestry measures for integrating mixed trees in agricultural landscapes, including fruit trees, orchards, yes, and shrubs and crops. So an intermediate result is that this existing Acorn project is quite similar to what we studied in the feasibility study. And this Acorn project could be a model for the smallholder farmers, which we studied. And the simplest option would be to check the project scope of the Acorn project and connect with the stakeholders there, whether the farmers could be part of this project. So this would be also the most cost-effective option. And otherwise, if this is not possible, or otherwise there could be an own project development, for example, under gold standard, Plan Vivo, or the ISO norm 14064. In general, there are three options. The first one is participation in an existing project which already exists under a carbon standard. This would be what I said. This would be the Acorn carbon project, which is already existing. The second option in the middle there, it would be an own project development via carbon standards, for example, gold standard, Plan Vivo, or ISO, or others. And the third one would be value chain intervention. Yeah. So this would include payment from a product buyer. So the product, the importer who buys the product from the farmer. Yeah, he could also invest in a carbon project with these farmers. In our study, we considered the first two options, where the income from the would come from a real carbon credit project with such a carbon standard as Acorn or as gold standard, and the sale would be via a platform or broker. And in case of the Acorn Rabobank carbon project, farmers would keep 80% of the income from the carbon credits. We would like now to show you the benefits of such agroforestry smallholder measures. activities, the benefits and the co-benefits. Usually when we speak about the carbon project, the focus is on CO2, on carbon, yeah? Please have a look at the left side of the slide. So very often the focus is just on carbon emissions, carbon removals, carbon. But of course, there are a lot of other benefits and aspects which are associated to such CO2 sequestration measures. Yeah, it's not just the carbon; it's also the biodiversity, the water saving, resilience, measures against degradation, resource security, social aspects, economic aspects. So our focus is always, and what we consider is always every benefit, not just the carbon, what you can see on the right side um, of the slide. And this is so it's not just the financial income from the carbon, but it's also an investment in the land. Yeah, cover the soil, build trees, save water. This is also an investment into the land, and this can also be monetized, but this was not the scope of our feasibility assessment. However, it goes along with carbon sequestration measures. Please show us next slide. Yeah, and in general, what one can say is the more trees and the more species, the more benefits will be there. So on the left side of the slide, you see a schematic of a simple orchard. Yeah, that's a field with some trees on it. So you can find that very often. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, those trees are fruit trees, and usually it's like 100 trees per hectare planted. So there is a lot of space between the fruit trees in such an orchard. The field is often, not always, but often without cover, so without vegetation cover. And this is usually associated to a poor soil fertility, few water holding capacity, quite some soil loss, and a rather poor biodiversity. On the other hand, on the right side of the slide, you can see something like an improved orchard. Um, this you see a similar field, but with much more trees. This is like a field with 400 trees per hectare, 400 orchard trees per hectare, so much more compared to the simple orchard. And also it's not just the fruit trees, it's also the poplars, poplar trees you can see as border trees there on the right side, which protect the field from wind, from hail, from too much sun also. And such an orchard has also usually lots of more soil cover. Yeah, more trees means often more soil cover, better soil fertility, more water holding capacity, fewer soil loss, more biodiversity, and in general an enhanced climate change resilience. So we studied both types of orchards, the simple one and the improved one, in our uh, um, carbon model study. So this is a bit of details of co-benefits from such poplar trees, yeah, mainly used as border trees. You can see that very often in Kyrgyzstan. They diminish soil erosion, for example, by wind. Also, there's an increased benefit for wood production and crop production, and increased farmer income in some cases, and then less demand for irrigation water. Yes, and of course, co-benefits for orchard, for densely planted orchard are increased crop and fodder production, increased farmer income, more soil cover, as said, yeah, more soil organic matter, also soil fertility, less wind speed, which means less soil loss by wind, an increase in nutrient and water efficiency, and yeah, also some challenges associated, not just benefits, but also challenges, like it's a bit, of course, more difficult to implement farm operations with in a densely planted field. Now we would like to show you a bit about method and results of the carbon sequestration potential. We used 3 different models for modeling the carbon sequestration potential. We studied 6 different scenarios, and of those, we studied 2 of them in more detail. You can see there the more deeply analyzed scenarios were the orchard 400 poplars 100 scenario. This means 400 fruit trees per hectare and 100 poplar trees per hectare on the same field, using machinery for establishment, using simple fences around the field, and using also climate change adapted seedlings and drip irrigation. So all these, this was considered, especially then later in the cost assessment, yeah. And the other detailed, deeply studied scenario was the orchard 100 poplars 25 scenario. This means 100 orchard trees per hectare, 25 poplar trees. Also established using machinery, simple fences, and climate change adapted seedlings, but without drip irrigation. So there were, and then later there were more scenarios, but those were the most relevant scenarios, and we would like to show you the results on the. So on this slide, you see 2 figures, 2 diagrams with a result. On the left hand, on the left part of the slide, you see the orchard 400 scenario, orchard 400, poplar 100. This is the densely planted field. And on the right side, you see results for a simple orchard, yeah, with only 100 orchard trees per hectare and 25 poplar trees per hectare. And what you can see in the diagrams is, first of all, on the x-axis there are the implementation years. So we forecasted the carbon sequestration for 30 years, from year 1 to year 30. You see the carbon sequestration. These are the red bars, and then you see the green or blue line, which is the accumulated carbon revenue. Yes, and you can see that it's increasing from year 1 to year 30. As said, the carbon sequestration was modeled with 3 carbon models, and we used an average from the results from 3 carbon models, and the accumulated carbon revenue line. This is the revenue, the income from the carbon credits, where we used a starting price of 35 euros, which increases year by year a bit. So, and what you can see now, if you compare the two diagrams, that the densely planted scenario, the Orchard 400 scenario, will bring much more carbon sequestration and also carbon revenue compared to the sparsely planted scenario with only 100 orchard trees and only 25 poplar trees. So the key takeaways are, yes, we can model, of course, the carbon sequestration, and we can model differences in carbon sequestration between different scenarios, of course, and the more trees are planted per hectare, the higher the carbon sequestration and also the carbon income, the benefit. Now it's about, it's not just enough to model the carbon sequestration, but also the costs associated to such a carbon sequestration. Thus, and now we showed the results of the cost benefit analysis and the basics. So these were the relevant considerations for the cost benefit analysis. On the one hand, we used we included all costs as associated to establishment of orchards, so planting trees, using machinery, using fences, using drip irrigation. All costs were associated, were included, and we got the costs from an on-site stay in Kyrgyzstan. So we spoke with farmers, we spoke with authorities, and we also used literature cases for this. And we forecasted the cost from year 1 to year 30. So for 30 years into the future, included an inflation rate of 4% per year. Yeah. And as said, for the income side of the cost benefit analysis, we included a carbon price of 35 euros per carbon credit. This means 35 euros per ton of CO2 sequestered, which also increases year by year a bit. The additional benefits, the co-benefits, which we spoke earlier about, the water saving, the biodiversity, the soil fertility, this is also basically monetization, but those benefits, so the income from those benefits was not factored in. So what you see here is similar, a comparison between the Orchard 400 scenario, the densely planted field, and on the left side, and on the right side, the sparsely planted field. What you see on the diagrams now is the ratio between costs, so all costs, establishment costs, plus also maintenance costs of such fields, yeah, includes labor costs and everything, and so between the costs and the income from carbon credits. So, and what you can see here, that for both scenarios, after 30 years, there would be a positive cost-benefit ratio. What you can see here, let's have a look on the left side of the slide, that in the first, say, 18 years, the cost-benefit ratio is negative, so more costs than income. But after from year 19 onwards, it gets positive, and it gets very positive until the year 30. So there's a after 30 years, we have a very positive cost benefit ratio. We calculated with this is for 1,000 hectares, as I believe, at 250 farmers. And on the right side of the slide, you see the same for the other scenario, where we only plant trees sparsely, 100 orchard trees per hectare and 25 poplars, and you can see that the cost-benefit ratio is not that positive after 30 years. It gets positive, but not that much as in the orchard 400 scenario. This is yeah, a similar figure. It shows the sum of the cost-benefit ratio after 30 years. So let's have a look on the left side of the slide for the orchard 400 scenario. You can see the white bars are is the revenue, so the income. The red bars are the costs, and the slightly green or gray bars are the profits. So the ratio, the costs minus benefit. And we showed this for different different situations: an optimistic scenario, a normal one, a conservative one, and a pessimistic one. So the normal one is where we show the costs as we programmed it, plus minus 0%. So the costs, there are costs, and they increase with inflation every year. But you never know how the costs are. You don't know how the costs are in 10 or 20 years. So we also included a conservative scenario outlook, and conservative scenario where costs are increased by 25% and revenues from carbon credits are decreased by 25%. This is the conservative one. And the pessimistic scenario where costs increase tremendously by 50% and revenues are very low, minus 50%. So, and even in the conservative scenario, after 30 years, there would be a profit. This is shown here for the entire 1,000 hectares. And only in the pessimistic scenario, there would be a negative cost-benefit ratio. And on the very left part of the figure, we have an optimistic scenario, which is similar costs, but revenues increased by plus 25%. As you know, carbon credit prices are not steady; they go up and down. So it can change. In the past, they have been more or less rising. They have been rising, but it's also going up and down. And on the right hand of the slide, you see the same for the sparsely planted field. So in that case, in the normal outlook, in the normal scenario, we would have a positive result, but already in the conservative outlook, there would it would be slightly negative. What you see now is a similar figures, but not for all hectares, but per hectare. So this is now per hectare. It's the trend looks the same, just the numbers are different. So we have here a normal outlook on the left side of the slide. We have that there would be a benefit or a positive carbon benefit ratio of 14,000 US. This is US dollars per hectare, and in the conservative one of still 2,000 US dollars per hectare. This is exactly, and in the other scenario, in the benchmark scenario, there would be then the results are less positive. It would be just 3,900 US dollar per hectare after 30 years, and the conservative outlook it is already negative. So the key takeaways. The only scenario with a very positive cost-benefit ratio after 30 years is the orchard 400 poplars 100 scenario, meaning again 400 trees per hectare fruit trees, 100 poplar trees per hectare, using machinery, simple fencing, and drip irrigation. We also studied uh, other scenarios, for example, with iron fences, and or even more the trees, like 800 trees per hectare. And such scenarios resulted in negative cost-benefit ratios because the costs are be too high. In general, of course, all cost data we collected and what we used should be examined further in perhaps in more detailed, reviewed, and verified, so the data quality of our model input data would be improved. As said, the results are also highly influenced by changes in the carbon market. So we use the starting price of $35 per carbon credit, which is a bit high compared to the average what is being paid for afforestation projects. However, the average is also based on intermediate quality in many carbon projects. So, but using when developing carbon project with high quality, then the price should be higher. This was the reason why we chose a larger, higher price. But of course, in our model, we also provide, as a result of this feasibility study, is an Excel-based model. One can change the carbon credit price, and then also the results change. So next slide, please. And I give the word to my colleague, Jakob. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rainer. So now I take over for the next couple of slides. What we also did during the feasibility assessment was to conduct a risk assessment to see if there are like risks or hazards that could potentially endanger the successful implementation of a carbon sequestration project. And to do so, we used a risk scoring system that is or was developed by the gold standard, which is one of the leading carbon offset standards and is known to be quite conservative, so quite difficult to meet the standards. So one could say that those are high quality carbon offset credits mostly, so therefore we used this system. So in order to calculate a risk score, we simply multiplied the probability for a risk to occur, so how likely is an event to occur, for example, a wildfire, with the impact, so what is the power of the event to destroy a carbon pool, and then also with the spatial scale, so how much of the project area is affected by a hazard or a risk to occur. And we evaluated a score between 1 and 3, so ranging from mild over moderate to severe. And multiplying all of those scores, we could at maximum receive a score of 27, which would mean that the risk is very severe, or a score of 1, which would translate to there is no risk. And if there is a risk score of above 4, that means that a risk mitigation measure has to be implemented. For the hazard identification of natural hazards, so for example, drought, wildfires, floodings, and so on, we used a risk tool called Think Hazard from the UN and a tool from Climate Analytics. And regarding the other risks, so for example, project risks, project management risks, financial risks, and so on, we developed a survey that we discussed with farmers on the ground and also with CAFLU. So in general, the risks are classified into 4 groups. So there are natural hazards, project management risks, financial risks, and market risks. And For the natural hazards, we identify that fire damage, animals, and water extremes are the most pressing risks, but also pests and diseases, temperature extremes, and the changing climate, so long-term change in temperature, are severe. Then also very pressing are financial risks, so upfront project costs to implement measures, but also short and long-term financial stability of project activities, meaning that we are able to fund project activities through the whole project. Then there are also project management risks, meaning that there could potentially be dependence on external support, so technical support, support in equipment, accounting, bookkeeping, legal support, but also the certification of the carbon credits. And lastly, there are also market risks, meaning that, of course, we are quite dependent on the carbon price, as Rainer also explained already during the calculation. So those uncertainties also give a certain risk. But we identified that the highest risks stem from natural hazards, so fire damage, animals and water extremes, and also the financial risks. And yeah, here we have the adaptation measures. So as said, for those risks where the risk score is too high, so above 4, risk mitigation measures must be implemented. And here we used the adaptation framework tool from the FAO and IFAD, so from UN institutions, for first screening, and then we discussed the findings with farmers on the ground to see if the adaptation measures are valid, and also with CAFLU. And it must be noted, of course, that these adaptation measures need to be adapted to the local frame conditions and discussed when a project is implemented to suit the local frame conditions, so that they are tailored to the realities on the ground, but also to get the buy-in from farmers and field technicians and so on to implement those risk mitigation measures long term. And we have mitigation measures for all the identified risks, but here we just brought with us a few of those. So, for example, for fire damage, which was a very pressing risk, training should be conducted with the staff. What to do if an occurrence, if fire would occur. And then fire barriers should be implemented, and farmers should, of course, be educated about the negative consequences, for example, of burning crop residues. Then for water extremes, if possible, drip irrigation against drought should be used. Drought-resistant local varieties, so seedlings, should be used. And if possible, also hail nets could be implemented against hail damage. And then in the long run, also regenerative agricultural practices should be implemented, for example, to increase soil moisture content. Against animals, fences should be built, of course. Therefore, we also included them into the cost estimation. Tree guards could be used, or community watch systems could be implemented. And to secure financial resources, alternative financial resources could be found to fund the materials and seedlings, and it should be assured that there are sufficient funds to kickstart the project and then to overbridge maybe some of the financial issues at the beginning of the project. And against the dependence on external support, local capacity has to be built, a knowledge sharing hub could be started, for example. And in general, the training should be conducted so that individuals on the ground know all the practices and that they can implement them in the long run. So overall, one can say that risk mitigation measures must be implemented for all of the identified project risks. And the highest risks stem from natural hazards, so wildfires, animals, and drought. But there are also substantive financial risks to fund the projects short-term and also long-term, and to assure liquidity. And the identified risks must be mitigated by locally adapted risk mitigation measures. This is really crucial. And the focus should really lie on inclusive risk mitigation measures to assure acceptance and also long-term implementation of those mitigation measures. Yeah, so what was very nice about this project, of course, also was that we did a field trip to Kyrgyzstan to discuss our findings, of course, that we did, because firstly we did this desk-based screening or desk-based analysis, and then we wanted to adapt it to the local conditions to see if all the estimations that we did or the assumptions are correct or not, and what we should adapt. But of course, we also got to know the team, the project partners, the country, the farmers, and authorities. So that was also very important for us. You can skip this one and go to the next slide, actually. In general, as you know already now, we conducted a feasibility study on the carbon certification of agroforestry systems in Kyrgyzstan. The objective was to meet the stakeholders, to introduce the project, especially also to the smallholder farmers, to cooperative and forest authorities. And then we also wanted to get insights into the local farm management with agroforestry adopters and also non-adopters to see what barriers exist there. And then we also wanted to assess potential areas for agroforestry. Key questions we had were to validate the risks that we had. So as said, we did this desk-based screening before that I showed, and we wanted to see, do those risks really match to the actual conditions on the ground or not? And the same with the adaptation measures, there we also wanted to see, are those valid for the local frame conditions or not, and what other adaptation measures are there? Then also very important is the technical feasibility. We covered that in another chapter later, but here we wanted to see, do farmers have the necessary knowledge and technology to implement agroforestry systems or not, and what do they need to do so? And also for additionality, we just wanted to check if it's possible to generate credits via agroforestry, or are there any hindering factors that would not serve or would hinder such a project. And also the farm management, of course, we wanted to see how do farmers actually farm. Okay, so what we did, we flew from Munich to Bishkek and visited many sites close to Isikul, Karakol, Jalalabad, and Osh. And there we had many meetings with farmers and also local authorities, and we had very fruitful discussions and findings with the farmers to evaluate our desk-based analysis. But actually, it was also extremely nice to find out how friendly, welcoming, and interested all the stakeholders were to meet us and to discuss the feasibility study. So from my side now, again, a big thank you to all that participated there and gave us very valuable insights. Okay, so here we just have some pictures of the visits. So as said, we visited with authorities, representatives. You can see that on the left side, and then with farmers in the middle, where we discussed a lot their practices and hinders. And we also watched or saw degraded land, so which could potentially give the opportunity for agroforestry system to get farm carbon credits. Now is the technical feasibility, so where we assess if there is the knowledge on the ground to implement those measures, the project measures, so to establish agroforestry systems or not. And we did so in having discussions. So we had a survey where we discussed this with local farmers, but also with KAFLU, and where we asked average farmers, field technicians, and discussed if they have the capacity to implement measures. And then also we came up with the overall readiness or hinders. And one can say that the average farmer has basic agronomic knowledge, but a bit of a lack of scientific background, especially on climate change adaptation and new crop varieties or seedling varieties. Limited knowledge on soil health, pest and disease, and mitigation practices. a lack of knowledge on agricultural best practices, and also lack of knowledge on high density orchards with irrigation and climate change adapted seedlings. Regarding the field technicians or extension services, they are not yet so common to use among average farmers. And this is also because there is limited support of field technicians and extension services, meaning that their accessibility and availability right now is still a bit limited. And to the overall readiness, so there are governmental tree nurseries, but they are focused on forest tree seedlings. And there are also private nurseries available for fruit tree seedlings. There is also the potential to import seedlings, but there can feature problems because they are not adapted to the local frame conditions and often lack sort of drought resistance, for example. But in general, farmers were very motivated to implement measures. And there is also some degraded or partly unproductive land, which has the potential to implement measures if the financing question would be answered, for example, through such a carbon offset project. So then one other very important factor when starting such a project is monitoring, because you have to monitor all the project activities. So you have to conduct an annual monitoring, you have to do soil sampling and tree measurements. And we also assessed that by mostly discussing this with Kaflu, because they can implement monitoring and they have a wide network and the capability and experience to do so. But still, there would be some external support needed with specific requirements set by the carbon standards. So, especially the statistical evaluation of the calculation. So, overall, we can say that the readiness of implementation is, or the technical feasibility is partly sufficient. So there is currently a lack of available knowledge on agricultural measures or project activities among farmers and field technicians also. And farmers need to be educated with adequate training. And the field technicians, there needs to be a increased rollout of extension services to reach the farmers, and training plans need to be developed when registering for a carbon project. And then looking at the implementation readiness overall, there needs to be an expansion of irrigation availability, especially in dry regions. Tools and equipment need to be improved. And as said already, trainings for farmers and field technicians must be implemented. Annual monitoring can be done right now with specific support in statistics and training, and soil sampling and tree measurement, there it's similar. So going to the next slide and looking at the key takeaways, we can see that the technical feasibility across categories is currently not given, and the only subcategory where it is given is the annual monitoring. And the limiting factor is the knowledge of agricultural practices among farmers and the outreach of the field technicians. And so it's essential for farmers to really understand why they implement the measures and that they understand the key benefits from them, so the added value to give motivation and long-term implementation, but also to assist them in implementing the measures via adequate training. And then for the monitoring activities, there needs to be investment in technology and statistical training. So actually the heart of a carbon offset standard are the certification requirements called additionality, performance, and leakage. And in the next slides, I'm going into this into more detail. So additionality means that carbon sequestration would not have occurred without the carbon project, so without the financial means of the project, but maybe also due to other support due to the carbon project. Permanence means that the storage that was done is permanent for a duration of a certain number of years, and in our case, we modeled it for 30 years. And leakage means, or no leakage means, that there is no impact on greenhouse gas emissions outside of the project area. So it could be that some measures introduced in our project areas sequester carbon, but due to those measures, there is a leakage in non-project areas, and this is not allowed. So when doing an assessment for additionality, first we identified alternative land use scenarios, and for this we mainly picked degraded land, meaning that this is the comparison we look at. So we establish orchards with poplar trees on degraded land. Then we conducted a barrier analysis. This means that project activities would be prevented by barriers without a carbon project. And these can be social, institutional, or there could be also technical barriers. Then we looked at the common practices. This means that those practices implemented due to the project are not common practice, or that they are distinct from measures or from similar types of activities that are common in the same region. And then the carbon project is not allowed to be obligatory by law, for example, not already financed or the first choice without such a project. Slide 48, just so you get a feeling for a barrier.
Very briefly, because we also want to have a Q&A session at the end.
Okay. Okay, then I just covered very briefly. It only means the barrier analysis that we look what barriers are there to implement project activities. This would be investment barriers, for example. So there are high upfront costs for the seedlings, for fences, for drip irrigations and trainings. And without a carbon project, it would not be feasible to finance those. We also have technical barriers to establish such orchards. So you need the site and soil preparation for orchards, you need extension services, climate change adapted seedlings, management practices, so new management practices for high density orchards, and so on. And this all looked at, and we evaluated it and said that those hinders are quite crucial. So we can say that there exist barriers without such a project. So we can say that there exist barriers without such a project. Then slide 50, please. Exactly. So another important factor is the permanence. So next to additionality, where we say that for 30 years, those measures or the sequestration must be stored. Otherwise, it's not permanent. And we evaluated this by conducting a score that we said if those other factors are positive, so a positive cost-benefit analysis, additionality, risk analysis, technical feasibility, and so on, it is also likely that the sequestration of carbon is long-term, so permanent. And here we evaluated a score of 15. So we evaluated that the project is also likely to be permanent because it has a positive cost-benefit analysis, because it's additional, and because the technical feasibility can be assured with some mitigation measures. So overall, slide 51, we see that the project is likely to be additional because substantial barriers exist, because the activities that we have are mainly not common practice, and the activities are non-obligatory. Project activities are also likely to be permanent, and we also did a leakage screening. So we had discussions on the ground with the survey and found that leakage is rather unlikely. Okay, so this was the APL section, and now I can hand over to Rainer again.
Thank you, Jakob. Exactly. Just a bit about the stakeholders to be considered in a carbon project. So as you remember, we had two options: an own carbon project development or joining possibly the ACON project. And for the first option, here is a short list of stakeholders to be considered. Of course, the most important stakeholders are the smallholder farmers on site. Then we also have KAFLU. We worked closely together with KAFLU. A big thank you again for showing, connecting us with farmers, with authorities, and showing us the country. They have a wide network and can be really useful in such a carbon project. And they recommended also here stakeholders, important stakeholders, as of course the Ministry of Agriculture, as which could be a main leader in a carbon project, but also the Forest Service section under the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Kyrgyzstan. Then the Ministry of Natural Resources, Ecology and Technical Supervision. Of course, again, KAFLU, its members and network, and not to be forgotten, science research institutes and universities. And on the other side, when deciding joining the existing ACON project, we have here also some stakeholders listed. First of all, from AFOCO, the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, we have here some contact options. And after that, also from ACON, Rabobank, there are also responsible persons, stakeholders, which could be then contacted. I think in this ACON project, there's already Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Emergency Situations included. So they would be then also stakeholders in such a project. A bit something general about the stakeholders in inclusion in a carbon project. So of course, as shown, first all relevant stakeholders must be identified and consulted prior to starting a carbon project. And this means stakeholders such as political stakeholders, administrational ones, environmental ones, social ones, and business stakeholders. So this is a required step by any carbon project standard, be it gold standard, be it Plan Vivo, ACON, or else. And usually there will also be in a carbon project a so-called local stakeholder consultation, which means a physical meeting on site, inviting all relevant stakeholders, plus local village people, relevant local organizations in the areas around project farms need to be invited. And the purpose of such a meeting is present them the approach to project and collect input, also ideas and possibly grievances for the project. And afterwards, after this physical meeting, it is mandatory to show how the input of those stakeholders was considered for the project. And of course, in case of a change of the project, stakeholders need to be informed and considered as well. Yes, the way forward. So on the one hand, we have seen that there are opportunities for such a carbon project. There is um, sufficient suitable degraded land, possibly also grassland available, which can serve as a baseline for a carbon project. I mean, for establishing densely planted orchard fields with poplars. There are farmers who already know how to basically manage an orchard. There's a good carbon sequestration potential when using the improved orchard model we showed you. Then we have also seen that there would be a positive modeled cost-benefit result for such a scenario. We have seen that there's already a project ongoing, the ACORN, a FOCO carbon project that can potentially be joined. And we have given APL feasibility. This is the certification requirements, additionality, permanence, leakage for such a carbon project. But on the other hand, switching to the right side of the slide, we have also seen barriers like there are certain risks, so environmental risk, project-related risks, which my colleague Jakob presented. Technical feasibility is partly a barrier as well. Training, more sufficient training options, and we have also observed a lack of knowledge for carbon project. and of course the mitigation measures. So it is would be necessary to plan the provided risk mitigation measures to increase knowledge, increase training, especially among farmers, and as say to identify and include stakeholders. The suggested next steps for planning such a project would be first contact the stakeholders of the existing Acorn Carbon project and establish a permanent exchange discussing participation in the project. Parallel to that, also contact potential stakeholders for an own carbon project development, such as Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Emergency Situation. Then discuss potential financing resources with all relevant stakeholders. So are there financial resources, so investment options, which can then be balanced by a carbon credit income later. Identify relevant farmers for such a carbon project. So we calculated with, I think, 250 farmers at the moment, but it can also be more or less. It should be rather more. Then started training for the identified farmers in terms of sustainable agroforestry, but also soil health and the basic of an envisaged carbon project. The next step would be planning the provided risk mitigation measures, document the pros and cons for both carbon project options, so either joining the Acorn project or develop an own project, and then choose also an option. Now we are very close to the end of our presentation. Conclusions and recommendations. So here you can find a summary of the results we presented. And with the information, is feasibility given, yes or no, or not yet? So carbon sequestration potential, yes, we have seen it is feasible, especially for the Orchard 400, Poplars 100 scenario. Cost benefit analysis, the feasibility is given. We have seen that is positive for that, especially for this scenario. Then co-benefits, also trading options, the feasibility is not yet given, as we have seen that training for farmers should be increased about positive effects of agroforestry measures, especially for densely populated orchards. Also the co-benefits. Technical feasibility is not yet given, is partly given, but not fully. So there is the necessary measures for that is to achieve this feasibility would be improve the knowledge on project measures and implement and also improve knowledge on risk mitigation measures. Next step is the additionality permanence leakage. This is the part which we call also certification requirements. The feasibility is given. There's a yes. And for the risk analysis, the feasibility is not yet given until the provided risk mitigation measures would be implemented. Yes. So this is basically again a list of the findings of the potential carbon sequestration, the cost benefit ratio, the co-benefits, risks, and knowledge dissemination that is essential. So more training would be necessary, and overall we found, this is point 6, the development of a carbon credit project seems feasible to us after based on the findings of this assessment. And of course, as said, first of all, one should consider the participation in this existing Acorn project. That was the last slide from our part. thank you for listening to us. We invite you now for questions and comments. So if something was not clear, I'm sure you have many questions. Please don't hesitate to ask them. We will try to provide answers on every question. Thank you.
Алло, здравствуйте, мне слышно? Вы слышите меня?
Да, пожалуйста.
Всем здравствуйте. Спасибо за приглашение. У меня такой вопрос. Ну вот про агролесоводство все понятно. В принципе, здесь вопросов нету. А вот по секвестированию, тот, что, допустим, у нас будет вот эта вот сертификация, да, и если мы будем секвестировать, насколько это отразится на наш ОНУФ, определяемый на национальном уровне вклад, да? Как это вот будет соотноситься с нашим ОНУФом? Вот то, что мы должны были снизить на международном уровне, и это мы начнем продавать, не возникнет ли вот этих вот как бы конфликта интересов, противоречий между теми обязательствами, которые страна возьмет на себя, и продажами? Спасибо.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, we know that the country of Kyrgyzstan, has updated its nationally determined contributions. It has the aim to reduce carbon emissions and also sequester carbon in soils and biomass. Usually, I think your question aims at whether such a carbon sequestration or project, as suggested here, could contribute to the nationally determined contributions of the state of Kyrgyzstan. Actually, I'm not fully sure if this can be done. So if a potential carbon project here could contribute to the aims of the country of Kyrgyzstan. Anyway, it must be sure that it must be clear that there's no double counting. So it's not possible that the carbon sequestration potentially achieved in such a project is accounted for both the country of Kyrgyzstan and a carbon project owner. This must be avoided at any time. I think at the moment it is not like that the country of Kyrgyzstan accounts all or can monitor all carbon removals. This means carbon sequestration, what happens in the country. So I think there would be no double counting of carbon sequestration. So this means no double counting of carbon credits. But of course, there should be perhaps a more detailed research and especially contact discussion with the responsible ministry, perhaps the Ministry of Agriculture, in order to make sure that there is no such double counting. So that when generating carbon credits from a carbon project, that it gets accounted to the project owner and not to the country, or so that it's clear who can account the potential carbon sequestration. So we recommend to contact the relevant stakeholders, probably the Ministry of Agriculture for that.
Большое спасибо за ответ,
Алло,
доктор.
теперь можно мой вопрос?
Да, пожалуйста.
Эрматов Оскар, Министерство сельского хозяйства, сектор агролесоводства и садоводства. У меня вот такой вопрос. Высокорослое это фруктовое дерево, скажем, 400 штук на гектар. Сколько тонн карбона съедает с 1 гектара?
Рейнер, понятен вопрос, да?
Yes, that's a good question. I have to check our detailed results because I don't have the number directly in mind. It's definitely so 400 trees, orchard trees per hectare plus 100 poplars per hectare is of course more carbon sequestration, yeah, per hectare compared to the only 100 orchard trees and 25 poplars per hectare. In this figure, we can see here we have just the total result and not the per hectare result, I think. I think if I remember correctly, if it is perhaps in such a densely planted field, it would be per hectare, I think like 8 to 10 tons, perhaps say 6 to 10 tons of CO2 per hectare and year. But I can update you with the correct value after this this session. This is just what was left in my head, so it's not necessarily fully correct. So I can, but I think I remember more or less that it's 6 to 10 tons per hectare and year.
To follow up on this question, this calculation you're showing here is for the nearly 10,000 hectares, right?
Exactly, yes. It's not per hectare, it's
So,
for the I think 1,000 hectares, yeah.
so we divide it by 10,000 hectares and then we have the answer, roughly.
Roughly, yes. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it depends a bit on the scenario used and the models used, but it's about, I also looked it up again, about 6.5 tons C only per hectare and year.
You mean carbon, not CO2, right, Jakob?
Exactly.
Okay, so carbon and then multiplied by 3.7 to get to CO2, right?
Yeah, that results in about 250,000 CO2 per year. So roughly, if we divide this by 10,000, then with the calculation of the 6 tons C, that roughly mirrors this graph.
Okay.
Okay, so I also had a question that I had typed in the chat, but I can ask it again here. Have you made an assessment whether it is feasible at all from an agricultural perspective to grow the orchard 400 poplar 100 scenario in Kyrgyzstan? It seems to be very intense compared to what I have seen in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah. Yeah, a good question. Thank you. Yes, we know that the common orchards are not 400 trees, fruit trees per hectare. It's rather 100 trees per hectare, but we have also seen 400 trees per hectare and even 800. So this was the reason because that we also included such scenarios in the modeling. For example, the Forest Authority of Osh, they establish currently some agroforestry, I mean orchard plus poplar in the fields. They use 800 trees per hectare. We did not do a forecast for long-term, not a long-term yield forecast. So we don't know how the yield would be in those 30 years. Exactly what we did was only the modeling the carbon sequestration and the costs. But as we have seen also such densely populated fields, not just once, but several times, we included this in the forecast.
And I have to correct what I said. It's 6.5 ton to 11 ton CO2 per hectare.
CO2, okay, yeah. Makes more sense, yeah.
Да, спасибо за ответ, уточняющий такой ответ. Есть еще какие-либо вопросы у участников?
Спасибо большое. Я хотел бы немножко рассказать по своей работе. Можно?
Да, ну у нас чуть-чуть остается времени, если очень кратко.
Как плохо слышно?
Если очень кратко.
Да. Но у нас вот последние годы по республике проводится большая работа по освоению малопродуктивных сельскохозяйственных пастбищ путем создания плодовых плантаций с применением агролесоводства. Можете переводить?
Да, переводят, синхронный перевод идет.
Да. Но у
Да,
нас
можете говорить.
по республике малопродуктивных сельскохозяйственных пастбищных земель составляет 614 тысяч гектаров по республике. 29 ноября 2024 году в Южной Корее подписано соглашение о сотрудничестве между Министерством водных ресурсов сельского хозяйства и перерабатывающей промышленности Кыргызской Республики и Азиатской организации по сотрудничеству с лесным сектором в области агролесоводства и садоводства, проект АФОКа. По проекту работа у нас началась в двух областях. Это Баткенская область и Сыкульская область. С площади 5000 гектаров. Из них 3000 гектаров в Баткенской области и 2000 гектаров в Сыкульской области. Это путем создания плодовых плантаций с применением агролесоводства и создания полезащитных насаждений. Мне все коротко.
Очень спасибо большое. Это, я думаю, что полезная информация как и для проекта, так и для участников. Я думаю, что мы в дальнейшем тоже свяжемся с вами и будем, надеюсь, на дальнейшее сотрудничество.
Спасибо большое.
Если еще какие-то вопросы у участников, у нас остается не так много времени, может быть, 1-2 вопроса.
Just to thank you for that what you said, Mr. Amatov. We would also love to be stay in contact and to exchange information, not just us from Sustainable AG, but also our partners from Hochschule Rhein-Waal and from KAFLU. Thank you.
Можно вопрос?
Да, пожалуйста, ваш вопрос.
Добрый день. Асаналиев Марат, GZ. Относительно последнего пункта на последнем слайде касательно участия в проекте Acorn, по-моему, да, если можно перейти на последний слайд. Да, участие в существующем проекте Acorn должно быть рассмотрено. Вы могли бы пояснить, что здесь подразумевается и если теоретически рассматривать участие проекта, то в каком качестве, может быть, временные рамки? Спасибо.
Yes, of course. We showed in the beginning of the session that there is an ongoing Acorn carbon project in Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, this is under this Acorn Rabobank carbon standard. One of the main stakeholders is the AFOCO, Asian Forest Organization. And this is ongoing with 11,000 smallholder farmers in Kyrgyzstan. They do similar project activities like agroforestry also. And so it's a similar project as we have here studied in our feasibility assessment. So, and as the feasibility assessment came to the conclusion that it would be feasible for some scenarios feasible to develop a carbon project, we should also consider this option to join this already existing Acorn project. This means, of course, you cannot just join it from the next day, but one would need to contact the stakeholders from that Acorn project. We have provided the contacts on one of the slides here. This means establish contact with AFOCO and with Acorn Rabobank Carbon Standard, and to discuss potential options of joining. And why that? Because it would be the most cost-effective and most simple option, the simplest option for including the farmers we are focusing here in order to get them to or include them in a carbon project. So this is because this is the reason why we wrote that here. does this answer your question? Otherwise, if you have more question, if something is not clear, please don't hesitate to ask.
Да, спасибо. Мы в курсе по поводу этого процесса проекта. Я просто подумал, может быть, еще какая-то дополнительная информация есть. Ну, пока этого достаточно. Спасибо.
Да, тоже спасибо за вопросы, интересные вопросы и ответ. У нас остается совсем немножко времени. Если еще какой-то такой горящий вопрос, и если нет, тогда тут участники... Если есть вопросы? Пока я не вижу, да?
I have a question.
От участников только вопросы. Да, пожалуйста.
Hello, Mr. Negra and Mr. Steckel. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Just out of curiosity, I had one question. I don't know if it's a dumb question, but if you go back to the slide on the cost-benefit analysis, it says that the benefits start from year 30, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, from year 19, I think. Let me check. Do you mean?
This, you had a CB analysis, so there was bars above and below to represent the cost
Can you
benefit.
go to slide 20? Yeah.
Yes. Just out of curiosity, because we're also conducting household surveys in Kyrgyzstan as well. And so if they start from, suppose, year 19 to have a positive benefit, for us, when I did this expert interview on poplar trees, so I wanted to see the level of productivity for the harvesting of timber or field wood over time, as well as the fruits. We saw that there's a growth period, a peak, and then it starts declining. Is it the same with regards to carbon?
Yes, I think a good question. Thank you. I'm sure your assessment is based on consideration that all farmers start at once with planting the trees. Then, of course, you would have a peak after 15 years or so, and then it goes a bit down. What we did here was to consider that not all of those 250 farmers here considered here would start at the first year, but that only 20% of the farmers start in the first year, and then year by year, 5% more farmers start establishing such improved orchards. So so a participation rate which goes up year by year by only 5% is a very conservative assumption. And this is the reason that the main part of the carbon sequestration, and thus also the main part of the positive cost-benefit ratio, will be reached in the later years.
Oh, and that's why it's increasing over time.
Yeah.
Accumulation.
It would be great now to show the Excel model, which is based on this result, and to show you how to change these options. Yeah, but this is the reason. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the answer.
So usually our experience, so we have experience in such projects, and we know that usually not all farmers start from year one, because the farmers are distributed in different regions of the countries. They need certain material and machinery to start planting, and this will not happen in year one for all participating farmers. So probably it's just 20, perhaps 30% in the first year, and if it goes well, more farmers will join such a project year by year. And so this would be rather feasible. But the negative consequence is then that it takes time until a positive cost-benefit ratio will be reached. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the clarification.
The question.
Да, спасибо большое за интересные вопросы и ответ. У нас уже подходит времени, почти мы закончили. От участников я запрос получила на получение презентации на русском и английском языке. Да, мы сделаем доступ для всех участников, чтобы они могли увидеть и запись, и презентации. Я думаю, что нам нужно закругляться, уже почти время. Хочу поблагодарить наших спикеров, доктора Рейнера и Якоба, а также всех участников за очень интересные вопросы, за активное участие. Большое всем спасибо. До свидания.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Goodbye.
very much. Yeah. And again, if there are still questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. You can write us an email. You can contact Kaflu. You can contact Gildis. Everyone, we are happy to answer any question. Thanks.
Да, все вопросы у вас есть в приглашении, e-mail, на него можно писать, мы обязательно передадим всем спикерам, и они вам ответят. Спасибо большое за участие. До свидания.